This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
And by work being broken, one of the fundamental causes is that when most leaders make decisions about how work gets done, they don't think about what we as humans want from work: meaning, autonomy, feedback. Can we think of employees themselves as customers of the work?
It is good to meet you, and we're going to be talking about that four-letter word called work, and I'm excited to talk about it and how do we make it more meaningful. So first of all, my question to you is, how did you two come together to work on this book together?
Well, I can maybe just start by saying I met Thomas, gosh, over 20 years ago. I was leading a large transformation program, and Thomas was the lead consultant for a consulting firm supporting the work. And it was like, wow, is he the smartest, most capable person you will ever meet? Fortunately, we became fast friends and collaborators on many projects, and we discussed the idea of a book, honestly, over a meal early in the pandemic. That organizations work itself is broken in so many of them, and there is a way to fix it. And by work being broken, one of the fundamental causes is that when most leaders make decisions about how work gets done, they don't think about what we as humans want from work: meaning, autonomy, feedback. Can we think of employees themselves as customers of the work? We really don't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's great. So you've known each other a long time. This is your first project together?
Well,
Yeah,
this
the
is our
first
first
book
writing
project. The
project.
first book project, yeah.
First book project.
But
Okay.
we've had the pleasure. I've had the honor of working with him on a number of other kinds of initiatives.
But this is the first book.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So the book is called Fixing Work. Now, what's the big idea behind this new book?
Yeah, I think as David mentioned, the big idea is that as leaders make decisions about how work gets done, we never really consider what makes a good job from the employee's point of view. And so we're going to try to make it efficient, right? We're trying to make it work for the customer. But oftentimes we really don't understand how the decisions we're making impact the experience of the employee, right? Work tends to be very fragmented, right? We learned that from Dr. Taylor. And so, right, we need oodles and oodles of supervisors to coordinate like a workflow from start to finish. And so that ends up like for the individual employee really with a job where, right, they don't use a lot of their skills. They're only responsible for a small piece of it. They really don't have a line of sight to the final outcome or to the larger purpose of what they're doing. And oftentimes they just don't get any feedback or have any autonomy. And so there are opportunities for leaders to shape work in a way that it delivers against those intrinsic human needs to do something meaningful, to have some agency, and to know how they're doing. And so that's the big of the idea of the book. And we chose to use a fable format to tell it so that readers can relate to that, right? So they can see themselves in the characters and see both the opportunities, but also the challenges to end up with a better designed work product.
And the timing is really important. Just to build on what Thomas said, we often hear about how engagement is low. We think of the so-called quiet quitting. According to some recent Gallup surveys, 60% or more of employees are not engaged. And fixing work shows how by changing the design of work, we really can have it all: more productivity, higher engagement, more customer satisfaction, by providing a practical roadmap for how to get there.
All right. Well, that's exactly what we need. And especially, I think the times have changed and shifted to where employees, I think, are demanding this, that they have, they got a little taste of freedom during COVID. And they said, wait a second, I'm working my whole life for one company and I don't really like it. Maybe I should do something else. Maybe start my own business. Maybe do, work in the gig economy. Maybe go find a job that I'll be celebrated and not tolerated. So I think it's the onus is on leaders now that you have to really work hard to attract and retain talent more than ever. I think is that what your feeling is as well?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's definitely become a lot harder, right? Because people have more options. People are not afraid to change jobs. I think the latest generation entering the workforce has no qualms about, right, stopping or leaving a job after 3 days or 3 months. Right?
Yeah.
I think when we all grew up, right, I think that was really a no-no, right? People were afraid of having gaps in their resume. I think that fear is gone, and I think it's interesting, right? I mean, the law of supply and demand really holds true, right? If the right demand of work exceeds the supply, right, then right, you got to do something as an employer to create a more competitive work product.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, this is not a new idea. It really does go back decades. It's so relevant today. But I think Thomas mentioned it goes back to, Henrik Hertzberg, Douglas McGregor, Hackman and Oldham. But the ideas are super relevant today, especially with, artificial intelligence, AI, gig work, where more and more people are becoming knowledge workers and really understand their own portability in the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's no stigma attached to, like you mentioned, gaps in the resume, working for 2 years. That's not a problem anymore. I remember growing, when I first came into the workforce, that was a big deal. You didn't want to be job hopping because you looked like you weren't a loyal employee. Now that doesn't matter. So yeah, I think the onus is on leaders and companies to attract and retain probably more than ever. So let's
Yeah,
get
and I
it.
think it comes at a big cost too, right? If you think about
Oh
right,
yeah.
people leaving after 18 months, right? It takes 3 to 6 months to train them, right? Then right, maybe they perform for 6 months. Maybe then if they're not happy, they start looking for another job right away, right? So they're not 100% invested in the job. And I think no company can sustain a turnover of 40, 50%, right? Especially if you look into like knowledge intensive businesses, right? So I think leaders should really make this a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned it earlier. This is not a typical business book. You've wrote this book as a parable, and we've seen some other authors do that over time, and I think it's been very successful. Why did you decide to present this concept in the form of a story?
So often work is thought of as mechanistic. And to your point about, celebrate versus tolerate, we wanted to approach work in a humanistic way, not just a mechanistic way. And, the parable format allows us to highlight the human in the work design, writing in a format that included characters you care about, circumstances readers can relate to in ways that makes it much easier to learn from, to emulate. Because implementing these concepts is not easy. People resist change, the politics, the misaligned incentives. The book shows what's possible if we design or redesign work differently. And so the story format really allowed it to come to life in a way that people could relate to and emulate more readily.
Yeah, I had one friend of mine who I gave like an early version of the book to read. He came back. He used to be the president of a mid-sized insurance company, and he said, I had PTSD reading the book, right? Because it reminded him so much of his work experience, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of, I think, what the opportunities are, but also what the challenges are of getting there.
It's really
Yeah.
remarkable how many people have said, "Hey, did you know about my company when you wrote this?" Right? Like
Yes.
this, have you been peeking into because it has that level of resonance.
Yeah, I think when we tell stories, there's a little bit of an emotional connection, right? So we follow the characters, we identify with the characters, we have that emotional, connection to them, and then we see, we see the problem, and then we see the solution, and we're attracted to those characters, and I think we learn those lessons deeper through stories. And we've had a lot of guests on the show talking about the importance of storytelling in leadership. And I think you guys have sort of said, hey, we're going to tell we're going to teach this lesson in terms of a story so that we gain all that bonus from the storytelling aspect. I would assume that was your thought.
Exactly. We've hidden the framework and the roadmap in the narrative, if you will. It's sort of like putting the pill into the ice cream, just to make the whole thing sweeter and easier to work through.
I think there's no shortage of business books, right? I have my own fair collection of them. But the challenge, and right, I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, right, is get beyond like page 25 or 30. Right? And
Yeah,
they all kind of like have the same narrative, right? It's like
yeah,
company A, oftentimes well-known companies, did this, and boy, did they achieve phenomenal results. And but the reality is, I think we all know a lot of these companies. I've worked with some of these companies.
mm,
It never lives up to, the textbook kind of example, right? I mean, change is always messy. People don't like it, right? It's a real art to thread that needle and make something happen in an organization. And I think, again, it's like, I think a narrative, I think, is probably the best vehicle to tell that rather than saying, right, here's the 55 steps you got to take. It also, I think, allows people to kind of like reflect and say, right, am I in the same situation? What's different for me? What's the same? And again, it's like step into, the shoes of the protagonist.
I love that. I had Ken Blanchard on the show, and he's been very successful in writing short books, and he does use story bases as a story base as well. And one of the things he said is like, I want people to implement these ideas. Like, I don't want to write books just to sell books and make money. I want to write books to where people are going to read them and then implement the ideas. And so a lot of what he writes are shorter books, and they have many of them have storylines in them so that you have that emotional connection and you're more likely to finish the book and implement the idea. So yeah, I commend you guys for both doing that, because I think, if anything, Ken's been very successful in writing leadership books. So, and
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
For
so
sure. It's also great to use real life characters and scenarios. I mean, one thing that comes up often when people think about how to get started is, hey, what did they do in the book? Pilot something, right?
yeah,
And think about what the main character Jerry did. I mean, he co-created a solution. He involved people, and by bringing some of the characterizations into the context, it takes on life more readily in many instances, rather than looking simply at a framework or a roadmap, in a drier sense.
yeah, I really like that. So let's get into some of the heart of the book. Yeah, in your opinion, what makes a well-designed and intrinsically motivating job?
Yeah, so I mean, right, the theory that the book is based on is it really comes from Hackman and Oldham, who created in the 1960s like a diagnostic vehicle to assess, how intrinsically motivating a job is. And it's really based on, right, the ideas of, Douglas McGregor, right, as David had mentioned earlier, and Henrik Hertzberg. Henrik Hertzberg said, if you want somebody to do a good job, give them a good job to do, right? Which begs the question, what makes a good job? So Hackman and Oldham studied that. They developed a tool that measures how people experience their work. Now that was in the 60s, early 70s. And this was actually, I think a lot of the work that they did when it was applied became sort of the precursor for re-engineering, right? Because the principles of what makes a good job, right, eerily similar to what we call, for example, lean manufacturing, right? It's like, right, minimize the handoffs, right? One person doing the whole job from start to finish, right? Connecting them to the customer, getting feedback and so forth. So the ideas have been around for a really long time. What we did when we, updated that framework to reflect like the modern age, we really looked at the role of technology in the modern workplace. And that was something that didn't have in the 60s and 70s, right? That, punch cards and, right, IBM 360s. And I think nowadays technology, AI, right, just one example, RPA, right, you name it, Microsoft, right, Office tools, they're in the workplace, they impact how people experience their work. So we added that component to the model, but it's just building on a body of research that's been around for 6 decades and has been confirmed again and again in every study. Well-designed jobs, you have lower turnover, you get more productivity, right? Employees grow and develop as part of the job. So I think there's a lot of, things to like about this approach.
Yeah, and it really, I mean, just to add to that, purpose, autonomy, and feedback. It really starts there. And the idea that knowing why people are at the job, why are they doing this, work that matters, autonomy, even though we obviously give something when we're working for others, but knowing what we're doing, how we control it, what our role is, and feedback, knowing how we're doing, rather than having the work itself give us feedback, rather than someone looking over our shoulder or the next person down the line, over the wall, rejecting something back to us. Getting feedback from the work itself. Most people want to self-correct. They want feedback from the work itself. If they have visibility to it, you don't get the sort of two-finger salute like it's someone else's fault, right? People want to self-correct it. So it really starts with purpose, autonomy, and feedback. Moves on, as Thomas said, technology is super important in today's age.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when I heard you talk about it, I instantly went back. Sorry, to Ken Blanchard. I don't know this is the Ken Blanchard episode, but he wrote a book called Gung Ho, and I read it when I ran my first manufacturing plant. I was just 32 years old, and I was clueless how to run a manufacturing plant. But I read that book, and he talked about in that book worthwhile work and the importance of worthwhile work, and it always stood with me. And I recognized that many of my employees in my factory didn't connect what they were doing to the bigger picture. And so one of the things I did was help talk about why them plating this part or machining this part, and how that went into the bigger picture and then created, circuit breakers that kept the lights on. And we helped teach them that lesson to make that job more meaningful. And it's not just, you're not just painting this part, you're keeping the lights on for this hospital, for a church, for a shopping mall. And it sort of changed their perception of what they were doing. So the idea of them doing worthwhile work. So it's always stood with me as an important thing. And I saw it in action in my early days in running manufacturing. So I love these three things: purpose, autonomy, feedback. Absolutely. Just my personal experience, these are really important in employees and having, again, jobs that they enjoy. So
and if you think about like the best job you ever had, and the worst job you ever had, and you write down the characteristics, invariably you end up at the same list of characteristics.
Right?
We're all kind of like wired the same way, right? We want to do something meaningful, otherwise we atrophy and we look for it somewhere else. That's why a lot of people do nonprofit work. Right? We want to have autonomy. If we don't get autonomy, we become disengaged and we withdraw. Right? And if you don't know how you're doing, right, then how can you be effective? Right? So I think this is really, there's nothing magical here, but I think it is kind of shocking that leaders get virtually no training in how to make decisions that's like maximize, right, the worthiness of a job, right, to go back to your expression.
Yeah, you're right. We're not aware. But if I look at my own career, I can tell you the times when I didn't have autonomy, or I didn't feel like I was doing something purposeful, or I didn't get any feedback. I hated it. Right. So these things are, they make a lot of sense intuitively, even if you have not read the research, and again, leaders, you're listening in, you're like, how can I make get my employees more engaged and excited? Well, have you answered these three questions? I think it's a great, a way to look at job design. So give us some practical examples. How do leaders design jobs that employees love? How do we go about doing? Because we still have to get things done, right? We still have boring things that need to get done in some cases, right? It is work. So how do we design jobs that employees love?
Yeah, I think there's a number of, relatively simple strategies, right? I think the first step would probably be to step back and say, what's all the work that gets done in the shop? And let's understand really, right, what's value added and what's not. And oftentimes you find, gee, we're producing these reports. Actually, we're not sure if anybody ever reads them, right? And when you check and you find out that nobody ever reads them, right, then you can get rid of that work, right? And you can focus more on what's the mission that we're trying to accomplish together versus all these other things that we put on top of it. Right? So I think that's job number one. The second piece is then to say, how is the work organized, right? Is it like we need like 7 people to do each their part perfectly, right, before, right, the final product is there? Or can one person do the whole job from start to finish? Right, gee, one person from start to finish requires a lot less coordination to make sure, right, everybody works in tandem, in synchronicity. So can you make one person, or can you have one team do the entire job? And then the next step is to say, can you connect them directly to the customer? Right? Well, if they can talk to the customer, they know what the customer wants, the customer gives feedback, it means that the manager has to do a whole lot less, right, checking and auditing and verifying that stuff get done. Right, and then last thing is kind of like, gee, if they're connected to the customer, right, so they're producing like intact, right, to the customer, then we can probably drive some of the decision making down, right, to that team or to that person making those decisions. We have done the same thing in manufacturing, right? There's like lean manufacturing is based on this idea of like, drive it down to, it's like somewhat self-managing cells. The military has done it, right? If you think about it's like, right, modern asymmetrical warfare, right? We can't afford to say all the decisions are being made in Washington, right? You're up there, you're 6,000 miles away, right? We'll wire you tomorrow your instructions, right? There got to be some local intelligence. I think a lot of organizations look at decentralization as like, one of these things that helps them become more agile, more adaptive. So I think, again, I think this is not, I think, a theory that's only about making work better for employees. Okay. It's really about, I think, a triple win. It makes it better for the customer, it makes it better for the business because people are more productive, and it makes it better for the employees. Right. So those are some things I think that people really can get started on. And oftentimes the starting point is really, take a look at all the work that's being done and see, like, is it very fragmented, right? Or is it actually, no, people can do the whole thing, feel some sense of ownership for it. So that would be, my starting point.
I think Thomas said it really, really well. Just to add, it also takes, just from someone who's been a practitioner, kind of on the operator side, it takes a leader willing to see beyond the status quo.
Mm.
This so-called triple win, it's actually possible, and I can tell you from direct experience, but it does take people, leaders willing to, wanting to improve for their employees, customers, and the company itself. The rewards are there. The evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of, that was one of my tricks. I would do reports. I would stop sending them in just to see if how long it
Yeah.
would take before someone said something about it. And so it was just like, but that's a great idea, is like, what are we doing that's not adding any value, and saying these are sacred cows, we need to get rid of them. Like why are they here? And again, I go back to lean manufacturing. This is waste, right? If we're doing something
Yeah.
that doesn't add any value, that's waste, and we need to be eliminating waste out of our processes. So this makes a lot of sense in my mind.
And it's so easy to see the waste in the manufacturing floor,
Yeah,
right? You put 1,000 pounds of raw materials in there, you get 750 pounds on the other end. Somewhere you lost 250, right? Start
yeah,
looking in the garbage bin, right? But I think when it comes to knowledge work, it's kind of invisible, right? If you think
yeah,
about, right, all these, right, email, right, work being processed via email back and forth, right, long email chains, 5,000 people CC'd upon, right, nothing moves forward. I think, if you look at sort of the knowledge work, transactional workspace, I think that's where we see the prime opportunities to do this. Because in manufacturing, most companies have exploited those opportunities, and it
yeah,
stares you in the face. But in the office, it's kind of like invisible, right? All these things
yeah,
look like, oh yeah, it's like everybody's busy. But
yeah,
is the real mission critical work getting done, and getting done well enough to, it's like, right, enable a future for the organization? And I think that's sometimes, once you look at it, you see, oh my God, we're spending 30, 40% on stuff that, satisfies some internal stakeholder maybe, but it's not really geared at the customer.
yeah, yeah. I know one of my jobs I was in, I won't say what company it was in. I was hired as a director, and I spent 8 hours a day in meetings. Like they literally I had to be in meetings because there was so much dysfunction in the company that we needed one representative. I was in engineering, one engineering representative in every one of these meetings. So I spent 8 hours a day going to meetings, and I got paid a lot of money, but I never felt like I was moving the ball forward. I just felt like I was just every day eight meetings I had to go to, and that's just my day, and I went home. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where I see, as you said, white collar productivity, or that's where your waste is. And it's like you said, sometimes it's hard to see because you think you're busy, but are you really
Oh, yeah.
adding any value to your customer, to your shareholders, to your employees? Nothing. We're not adding any value.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I've
think
had a
there's
lot
a
of
lot
time.
of middle managers, right, that might go to work for 2 or 3 years in these like well-known large
Yeah.
global companies. And when I talk to them, right, some of them say, gee, it's like, I've been here for 3 years. I can't point to anything, right,
Yeah.
that I actually accomplished. That, you put some points on the board.
Right.
And I think, we've created that ourselves. We
Yeah.
created these elaborate hierarchies with, like, 15 layers from the CEO to the person who does the work. And no wonder that people get lost in the middle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like mistaking vibrations for forward progress.
Yes.
The meeting is activity. It's activity, but it's not adding value.
Yeah.
And that's where this approach can be so powerful, because it helps you unpack the work. It
Yeah.
helps you really look at the work, sort of unpack it mechanistically, and then add these humanistic elements and realize, you know what, this could be redesigned and streamlined in such a way that we're adding value times three.
Hmm.
Super powerful.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So I have a question for you. One of the things I often say is that people are messy. So everyone's different. What motivates them is different. What gets them inspired, what makes them feel that they're accomplishing their purpose is different. So how do you cope with all this human variation when you're trying to create jobs that are intrinsically motivating? How do you deal with the differences in people?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at this, right? I mean, one is there are some people that don't want an intrinsically motivating, super challenging job.
Yeah.
If I'm a jazz musician, right, and I'm playing at BB King's tonight, I'm going to preserve all my mental energy, right, to get on stage and perform. I am not, invested in my job at this insurance company, right, moving paperwork. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do a good job, right? Just doesn't mean that, don't create a job for me that is so challenging and requires me to be on, right, 10 hours a day. So I think it's kind of like the, round peg, square hole type scenario, right? Now, honestly, in my experience, that's a rare problem. Most of the times we err on the other side. We take highly motivated, energetic people and we put them into jobs from hell. And then we wonder, right, why they kind of like die on the vine, like after 18 months and, went from hero to zero, right? So I think that's probably the bigger problem there.
And I'm reminded, I'm sure you probably have heard about it, many of your listeners may have, about the story about the bricklayers from Christopher Wren when he was rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral, and he passed by, the workers who were doing all of the preparation on the job site, and he sees three bricklayers. He asks one of them what they're doing, and the first of the three comes by and says, "Well, I'm laying bricks." The second of the three says, "I'm building a wall," and the third, of course, says, I'm building a cathedral.
Mm.
And the sense of purpose that each of them have is very different. One's focused on the labor, maybe their mind is someplace else. One's focused on servicing their family, and one is invested in the vision and the purpose of the overarching enterprise. Of course, all are fine, all are valid. Being the designer of the work needs to accommodate for all of this, which is why purpose is super important. So is autonomy and feedback, to allow the galvanizing of all types. And I think your term is great. People are messy. We're all messy in different ways, and galvanizing those efforts collectively.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. And so even when you have different purposes, you still are, you can still create a job that is intrinsically motivating, and it's still going to be different for different people. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not tied to the company, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, right, they define themselves like by, the job that they have. I'm a salesperson, right? My job is right, to generate revenue. Doesn't matter if you work for General Electric or ABB or whoever, right? You define yourself as a salesperson, like a lot of the medical professions, right? Right? Physicians don't associate with the hospital system, right? They associate with, I'm a ophthalmologist or whatever they are, right? So I think companies sometimes overemphasize like the corporate purpose, right? We're feeding the world, we're providing enjoyment, whatever that is, right? But I think for a lot of people, I think purpose exists at a much lower level. It's like, to what extent can I, right, develop mastery in this job, right? Be the best I can be. And the label on the door, quite frankly, doesn't matter that much.
And we've all worked in organizations of different sizes. It's why, in a way, startups are so fascinating, because more often in a startup, everyone knows what the purpose is.
Yeah.
There isn't a cash cow yet to protect. Feedback from the work itself versus the manager is more common. You're all in, one room or one garage, if you will, or one office. But when the firm gets large enough to start splitting the work into departments, moving some of the work upstairs or downstairs or across the globe, we start replicating job descriptions, engagement drops. We start, throwing things over the wall to other folks. Outcomes suffer. That's when, reading fixing work becomes even more important.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was just reading an article about CVS and the CEO and some decisions he made, but one of the comments was that they had 9,000 people in their headquarters, and I just, as I'm running a small manufacturing company, I'm just 9,000 people just in the headquarters. Like, what are they doing all day long? And maybe you need 9,000 people in your headquarters. I don't really know, but that stuck out to me, is that there are people in that building that may not know what their purpose is, and they may not be tied to the mission. They maybe feel like they're just a cog in the wheel somewhere with that many people in one location. That just seemed like a lot of people, and so I think you're right. As we grow our businesses from that founder's intent, and everyone is on the same page and everybody knows what the mission is, to where these big companies where you're not really clear what the mission is, then you start losing your energy for doing the work, because I don't know what I do here. I just move one paper from one pile to the other, right? So it's a big challenge, I think, especially in the bigger companies, to make that work meaningful.
I think it's easier for decentralized companies.
Yeah.
Right? Companies that intentionally say, all right, let's push this to the front line, let's be close to the market. I think the death, for a lot of organizations is, quite frankly, once you centralize and you dictate, right, what happens around the world from a cushy headquarter, right, somewhere in the Swiss Alps. And I think that's the recipe to get in trouble, right? And I think the more decentralized you make it, the more it forces you to drive decision making to the front line, where it should be, right? And
Yeah.
so you just deal with enterprise questions versus individual business issues.
You know, before we press record, we both mentioned we work for ABB and we work for Percy Barnevik, and he was a CEO that believed in decentralized operations. So he gave a lot of autonomy to his local managers, and he said, "Move fast." You know, move fast, make decisions, make money. And I loved being part of that because we had huge amounts of autonomy. We had great feedback and we knew what our purpose was. So we had that. And I loved being part of the company back then because we had so much autonomy. But I think over time, they became much more, they built up their headquarters. But back in the day, they had like 10 people in Zurich that were running this, $40 billion show, which was amazing. You know, it was a fun part.
Yeah.
It was fun to be part of.
Yeah, it was like right, 400,000 people, right, 5,000 individual business units, right? So think about the number of opportunities for people to have P&L responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Gee, 5,000 opportunities. Now, at some point, right, one sharp accountant came out and said, gee, right, there's 5,000 heads of HR, heads of finance. Boy, we got to get some economies of scale. But then, right, if you get economies of scale, then you end up with very fragmented work design and you lose all that speed, all that agility, right? All that employee engagement, because now everybody just waits for, right, the folks at the top to figure out what they want to do next month.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And when you mentioned the military, one of the things that annoyed our enemies, I was a submariner during the Cold War. What annoyed our enemies the most is that Americans were unpredictable. So the local captain had all the authority to do what he needed to do, and we weren't playing by any rules. And so our enemies were like, you can't go up against an American because you never know what they're going to do. And that was our strength, is that we had local autonomy. Yeah. So I love that. So what benefits do companies get from fixing work? What's, if we're talking to people, higher ups in companies, what's our business case for why we should do this?
Well, the good news is it checks a number of boxes. All right. So one is, right, people don't leave well-designed jobs. Right? If you design the job to grow and right and help the person develop and develop mastery and give a sense of autonomy, people don't leave that job to go to like a traditionally designed job where they're just a cog in the wheel. They don't, right? I mean, turnover drops next to nothing, which is, I think, in this economy, I think, right, really important.
Yeah.
The second aspect of that is engagement, right? You might be able to keep them, you put golden handcuffs on them, but they're not mentally there, right? They're not invested in the mission, right? So I think, again, because this is something that you got to do with the people, right, to shape the work. You got to, as a leader, it's a servant leadership model to enable them to, right, redesign the work to a significant degree. So you get a lot more engagement. You also get a lot more productivity. You eliminate all these crazy handoffs. It doesn't take any longer 29 people to change a light bulb or hire an engineer or approve a purchase order, right? You also get a better customer experience because, right, you connect people to the customer, but you take all these layers, right? And if you ever called the help desk for an insurance company or, anything like that, but you know how many handoffs you go through until maybe your problem is solved, right? So I think those things also go away. Accountability goes up because people all of a sudden, right, they own that particular customer segment, so they feel responsible and accountable for it. And, this is also maybe one benefit that managers might not like that much. You need a lot less layers of management. Because if you really design the work right, people can actually, believe it or not, manage themselves to a significant degree. There are some, right, industries, pharmaceutical manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing, right? You can't delegate that responsibility to the operators, right? But in many industries where it's not as mission critical, you can. And if you think about, right, not just the cost of all these managers to make sure that Johnny did his job, right, when he was supposed to do it, how he was supposed to, and so forth, and really allow people at the higher levels of the organization to spend that time, it's like building the future rather than like, solving the problems of the present or the past. I think, that's probably a benefit that you can't even overestimate, given, just the cost of management and the cost of hierarchy. Yeah. And quite frankly, all the innovation that it kills, right? Yeah. Because as you make the organization flatter and more adaptive, right, you invite people in to really take ownership for the work and come up with their own ideas for how to make it better. Right? Yeah, but it's like you don't need to go right all in, but I think those are some of the benefits I think that are available to organizations that embrace these ideas.
Yeah, and I would just add, as an executive in firms like the one in the book, that there's also a huge opportunity, just building on what Thomas said, also for development planning because of this less traditional management, more effective succession planning. And I just want to harp again on something Thomas mentioned, innovation, because of so much of the direct client interaction. You can push innovation down to an palpable level, down to the floor, because people are hearing directly from customers. They're going to come up with so many better ideas, and that's going to feed the innovation engine of an organization so readily. It's super powerful.
That's fantastic. I mean, you give me a compelling case here. I've got a lot of benefits written down by doing this. And again, these are the things that leaders are looking to try to do in their companies to be more efficient, be more effective, be more innovative, more customer focused, get less turnover, all these things they want. And so the solution is getting to the job design and getting better job design. And so this is why fixing work is such an important topic. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners about this topic?
I'm happy to offer a quick one. Just, hey, as someone who's sat in boardrooms of different organizations, there are so many competing priorities. And what makes this different, firstly, it really is a triple win. I know that's been mentioned before, but customers, employees, the company itself all benefit. And partly as a result, it has internal and external value from day one. We're always competing for scarce resources. Most firms acknowledge that, people are their most important asset, supposed to be. This simply extends that priority into one of the highest leverage ways out there.
No, that's fantastic. So the book is called Fixing Work. Fantastic discussion we've had. Again, leaders, if you're thinking about what are we trying to do here in our businesses, what are we trying to do with our people? If you've got issues with quiet quitting, if you got issues with turnover, if you got issues with engagement, this is your solution. This is the thing that you're missing out on. And I really appreciate David and Thomas sharing some parts of this book for you. But I really encourage you to learn more. So how can our listeners find out more about both of you, this new book, and your companies?
Probably the easiest way to find easiest place to go to would be the website for the book, which is www.fixing-work.com. And that has information about the book, where to get it, some of the key ideas. Also has a link to a podcast, to a newsletter. It also links back to, David's homepage and my homepage. And so you can, use that as a jump off point to learn more about our respective work.
Well, fantastic. We're going to put a link to that in our show notes. And again, listeners, I highly encourage, if this is something that is resonating with you, if you're saying, wait a second, this may be the solution I'm looking for, I highly encourage you to reach out to David and or Thomas and get more answers to your questions. Go out and get this book, read through it. It's a parable. It's a story. You can read it, and it's not going to fry your brain. You're going to learn something quickly. You're going to be able to implement it in your business. So I highly encourage you to go out and get the book. Follow the link in the show notes below, and you'll be able to learn more. And again, reach out to David and Thomas if you feel like this is something you want to learn more about. So David and Thomas, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I learned a lot, and I wish you the best of luck in this new book. And thank you for writing it, and thank you for taking this approach, because I think it's really important.
John, thank you much, and thanks to your listeners.
Thank you so much for having us. Really enjoy your podcast.
Thank you. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.